Some places feel haunted, long before anyone claims to have seen a ghost. Long before the whispers begin or the stories take shape, there are pockets of earth that seem to remember too much. They hold on to what the living have forgotten: grief, anger, and the sharp echo of lives violently interrupted. High in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where wind scrapes across empty hills, there stands one such place. A town that refuses to die, even though everyone who lived there has been gone for generations. A town that seems to breathe in the silence between gusts of cold mountain air. Its name is Bodie, an old western ghost town. At first glance, it is little more than a skeleton of its former self. Sun-bleached facades, warped wooden porches, and shattered windows staring blankly across the sagebrush. But spend a moment there, even alone in the middle of the day, and the sensation is unmistakable. It feels as though someone is watching from behind those darkened panes. Someone who hasn't quite accepted that their time here is over. What happens next depends on the visitor. Some walk away untouched. Others walk away altered. In the late 1800s, Bodie was a roaring mining town, built on gold, greed, and the promises men make when the earth beneath them suddenly becomes valuable. At its height, the town swelled with thousands of people: miners, merchants, drifters, and outlaws. Saloons lined the streets, candles flickered in gambling halls, and gunfire broke the quiet with a frequency that barely raised an eyebrow. Bodie was a place where fortunes were found and lives were lost with equal speed. The desert wind carried the scent of whiskey and gunpowder, and late at night, when lantern light burned low, the creak of floorboards inside certain homes could make the most hardened prospector pause. By the early 1900s, the gold dwindled. Fires tore through the town. Harsh winters claimed those who stayed too long. And one by one, the buildings emptied. Doors were locked for the last time, windows were shuttered. What remained was a ghost town in the truest sense of the word. Not just abandoned, but strangely alive. Today, Bodie stands preserved in what historians call arrested decay. The buildings remain exactly as they were left. Beds unmade, dishes still on tables, school books resting on desks. All frozen in a moment that should have dissolved into dust long ago. What gave rise to the legend of a curse cannot be found in the ruins themselves. It waits in a back room of the ranger station, in a row of plain cardboard boxes that look entirely unremarkable, until you open one. Inside are letters, hundreds of them. Each arrives the same way. A small stolen object wrapped carefully in tissue. And a confession. One letter, mailed in the early 90s, came with a single bent nail taken from the floor of an old outbuilding. The writer said that from the moment they left Bodie, life began to tilt in a direction they could not stop. First small setbacks, then a cascade of larger ones. They called it a steady downward slide. Returning the nail, they wrote, was their last hope of breaking whatever this is. Another envelope arrived in 1994. Inside were several splinters of wood and rusted metal. The letter was addressed simply, "Dear Bodie Spirits." The writer explained that since taking the pieces, their life had fractured in quick succession. A car accident, the sudden loss of employment, a streak of illness that lingered without diagnosis or relief. They described the misfortune not as coincidence, but as something that felt earned, something that followed them home. The letter ended with a plea, "Please put these back where I found them." Another writer returned fragments of a broken bottle, explaining that their household had fallen into a strange, relentless pattern of technical failures, appliances burning out and pipes bursting. They called it a cloud that wouldn't lift, and wrote that they hoped sealing the fragments in the envelope would be enough to convince whatever clung to them to stop. Dozens of others echo the same pattern. Some mention accidents, some mention financial ruin, and some speak of illness, their own or their families'. Others describe something vaguer, but somehow worse. A run of bad luck that felt targeted, as if the town had stretched invisible fingers across miles and grasped at their lives from afar. Each writer insists they didn't believe in curses, not until now. Whether the curse is real or not, one thing is undeniable. People don't mail objects across states, sometimes across oceans, unless something has shaken them. Yet something in Bodie refuses to crumble. Something holds the place upright, as though time is only reluctantly allowed to move. And it is here, among the silent houses and wind-scoured streets, that visitors claim to encounter things they cannot rationalize. Shadows moving where no one stands. Footsteps on staircases long closed, faces staring from upper windows. Sometimes the air grows heavy, as if a presence settles over a room like a winter blanket. Other times the feeling is far more personal, closer, colder, and impossible to ignore. These stories are not recited by tourists looking for thrills. They're repeated by people who expected nothing unusual, who came to admire the ruins of the Old West and left convinced they had brushed against something still lingering there. And among all the reports, 2 houses stand out above the rest. 2 places where the boundary between the living and the dead seems dangerously thin. The first stands at the edge of Green Street, a weathered home once belonging to J.S. Kane, one of Bodie's most prosperous citizens. The house is modest compared to the sprawling mansions that rose in richer boomtowns, but it carries a peculiar weight. Even from outside, it feels occupied. Visitors often linger on the porch, longer than they intend. Some say the air feels thicker here, as though pressing gently against their chest. Others say nothing at all, yet find themselves exhaling slowly, as if bracing for something unseen. The reports vary, but one story returns again and again, recounted by park staff, rangers, and the rare individuals who have spent nights inside the town for preservation work. It begins with a bedroom on the 2nd floor. Those who sleep there describe a strange phenomenon, an overwhelming pressure that descends in the early hours of morning, a weight settling onto the chest, difficulty breathing, the unmistakable impression of someone sitting at the edge of the bed. This isn't the anxiety that comes from being alone in a ghost town at night. Witnesses describe it with remarkable consistency. They wake to the sensation of a heavy figure perched beside them, leaning close enough that they can feel the shift of the mattress. The figure is often accompanied by a fleeting image. The outline of a woman, broad-shouldered, hair pinned back, clothing from a century ago. Some describe the encounter as suffocating, others as mournful. But all agree on one thing. She does not feel like a fragment of imagination. She feels deliberate. Doors inside the home have been known to open and close on their own. Shadows drift across hallways when no one is standing near the windows. Objects left on a table are later found on the floor, not tossed, but placed as though someone moved them absent-mindedly. And while most ghosts are said to reveal themselves in fleeting glimpses, the presence in the Kane house lingers. It makes its presence known, not with terror, but with the oppressive intimacy of someone who refuses to be forgotten. Across town, beneath the same brittle winds and under the same vast sky, stands another place where the past refuses to rest. The Deschambault house, once a boarding establishment tied to the Metzger and Deschambault families, sits quietly at the corner of Green and Fuller. Its windows stare down at the road like dark, unblinking eyes. During the day, the house feels watchful but harmless. At night, it becomes something else entirely. Visitors walking along the street have reported glancing up to see a pale figure standing in the second-floor window. A woman, motionless, her features obscured by the gloom behind the glass. She appears just long enough for the mind to register her presence. A second look reveals nothing but empty space. Rangers have inspected the locked building after such sightings and found no footprints in the dust, no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest that anyone, living or dead, had walked those stairs. The figure is always described the same way: still, silent, patient, as though she has been waiting decades for someone to look back. There is a particular unease that settles in when a ghost refuses to move. Flickering shapes and darting shadows can be dismissed as tricks of the eye, distortions born of nerves or poor lighting. The woman in the Deschambault house lingers like a memory given form. Witnesses say the moment their gaze meets the window, a coldness slides down the spine. Subtle but unmistakable, as though the body recognizes something before the mind does. The sight lasts seconds, sometimes less, yet leaves an impression that lingers for days. A face that cannot be fully recalled. A posture that feels unnervingly familiar. And eyes, if they are eyes at all, that seem fixed not on the town below, but on the person who noticed her. Some believe she was a resident who died in the boarding house long after Bodie began its slow decline. Others say she was a traveller who stayed there only briefly in life, but never really left in death. But the truth remains sealed behind the walls of that empty room, locked under decades of dust that refuses to shift. She is one more secret, in a town built on them. Yet even the Deschambault apparition pales in comparison to one of Bodie's most unsettling tales, one rooted not in suggestion or shadow, but in a sequence of violent events woven into the town's final years. Long before Bodie became a ghost town, it was already a place marked by sudden tempers and unresolved grudges. Arguments flared quickly, and bullets often settled disputes faster than words. Among the many stories of violence, one stands apart. It began with a man whose name is lost to history. Accounts describe him as a miner, worn by the harsh winters and the harder life that Bodie demanded. One evening, driven by drink, desperation, or something darker, he shot his wife during a domestic argument. The details blur in the retellings, but the ending is always the same. The woman died, and the town responded in the only way it knew how. 3 men, whether deputies, vigilantes, or simply locals who had seen enough, dragged the murderer from his home and executed him. Some versions claim he was hanged. Others insist he was shot on the very street where he killed her. But what followed is where the legend takes hold. According to those who lived through Bodie's decline, the ghost of the murdered man did not rest quietly. The 3 men who carried out the execution reportedly began seeing him in the weeks that followed, standing in doorways, appearing in alleys, or looming at the foot of their beds, always appearing silent. One witness recalled hearing that the apparition would raise his fist towards the men, shaking it in rage, though no sound ever accompanied the gesture. One by one, those 3 men fell ill. Not suddenly, but in a slow, wasting progression that baffled the town's doctor. Strange fevers, persistent weakness, a decline that no remedy could slow. In most towns, such a tale would fade into folklore. But in Bodie, stories like this feel less like myth and more like warnings carved into the bones of the place. The deaths of those 3 men marked a turning point in Bodie's final era. Whether one believes in hauntings or not, the effect on the townspeople was undeniable. The story moved through the streets like a cold draft creeping under a door, quiet, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Folks who once laughed at superstitions found themselves glancing over their shoulders at dusk. Men who swaggered through saloons with the confidence of the unafraid began avoiding certain alleys after dark. Even those who refused to speak of the affair seemed to tread more carefully, as though acknowledging that something in Bodie had shifted. In the months that followed, a stillness fell over the town. The mines slowed. The saloons emptied. The nights grew longer, and the sound of wind scraping across boarded windows seemed louder than before. Some said the murdered man's spirit had not only tracked down those responsible, but had sunk into the town itself, leaving a tension in the air that not even time could ease. Others believed the story had simply cast a shadow on an already troubled place, amplifying fears that had always been there. Regardless of its cause, Bodie's decline accelerated. Families packed what little they had and disappeared down the dusty road that led out of town. Miners drifted toward newer prospects, and soon, the once booming settlement sank into silence. Yet, as eerie as these accounts may be, there is another layer worth considering. One grounded not in the supernatural, but in the very human desire to make sense of abandoned places. Some often argue that ghost stories, curses, and accounts of lingering spirits are little more than folklore given momentum by time. According to this view, the legends grew not because Bodie is haunted, but because it needed to be protected. After all, a town left exposed in the desert is vulnerable. Tourists take souvenirs. Vandals pry open doors. And history disappears in pockets and backpacks. Some historians claim the curse began as a practical deterrent, a whispered warning from early preservationists, designed to keep visitors from taking home just one small piece of the past. Fear can be an effective guardrail, especially when signs and fences fail. But this explanation collapses upon closer inspection. Because long before Bodie became a state historic site, long before rangers logged apology letters, people were reporting the same thing. Rash after rash of misfortune linked to stolen items. And these accounts don't come from one era or one type of person. They come from families, travelers, hikers, even overseas visitors. The pattern is too broad, too consistent, and spans too many decades to have been orchestrated by a single preservation effort. Then there are the accidents, vehicle collisions, sudden illnesses, strange streaks of physical or financial disaster that appear immediately after removing something from the town, and stop once the item is returned. If this were merely fear or coincidence, you'd expect randomness. Another theory suggests that Bodie's hauntings are simply psychological projections, that visitors, influenced by the atmosphere of an abandoned town, manufacture fear and then misinterpret ordinary sounds as something supernatural. Old houses shift. Wood expands and contracts. Wind can whistle through a crack, and shadows can trick the mind. But this idea also falters under the weight of evidence. Repeated sightings of the same figure in the Deschambault house window, described independently across years by people who never knew each other, defy the randomness of imagination. These are not people primed to scare easily. They know the structures, they know the sounds. Yet many describe the same suffocating pressure at dawn, the same indentation on the mattress, the same feeling of someone sitting beside them. Rational explanations begin to strain. Folklorists often argue that Bodie is haunted, not by spirits, but by the emotional residue of hardship, echoes of lives lived on the edge of survival. According to this theory, when a place absorbs enough suffering, it becomes heavy with memory, and those who enter it may sense fragments of the past lingering like static in the air. But even this idea falters in the face of the vigilante story. The three men who executed a murderer and then died one by one, each claiming to have seen the same spectre, each succumbing to the same mysterious decline. Emotional residue does not explain shared hallucinations, nor does it explain why their symptoms mirrored each other with uncanny precision. Maybe the stories were meant to protect Bodie. Maybe the fear kept looters away. Maybe people saw only what the isolation encouraged them to see. But there are places where coincidence strains to breaking, and where the past feels uncomfortably closer than it should. Bodie is one of them. Whether these experiences come from restless spirits, collective memory, or the eerie persistence of a town that refuses to fade, it remains a place where history presses against the modern world with an unsettling persistence. It stands as a reminder that some histories refuse to stay buried, and some towns, long after their last residents have gone, continue to breathe.